Hello everyone, I'm Jed Rubenfeld, and this is Straight Down the Middle. Well, today I'm going to be telling you about a Supreme Court case decided just a couple of days ago called Mahmoud versus Taylor. It's a very important case, even though it's been flying under the radar a little bit because of the Supreme Court's other decision in the birthright citizenship or nationwide injunctions case. If you want to learn more about that one, check out my last episode. But Mahmoud versus Taylor, you ought to be keeping your eye on this case. In this case, the Supreme Court held that parents have a constitutional right to opt their little kids ages 5 to 11 out of pro-LGBT classes in public schools. This is an extremely important case. I'm going to tell you exactly why it's important. I'm going to tell you exactly what the Supreme Court held. And I'm also going to tell you about a couple of unanswered questions the decision leaves open, because that's a big deal too. All right, let's jump in and get started. So what did the case what kind of questions did the case present to the justices, and how did they hold? The case begins or originates out of Montgomery County, Maryland. And what happens is the Montgomery County School Board makes a decision. It decides, as a lot of school boards have around the country, that it's not doing a good enough job teaching certain issues of sexuality, gender identity to little kids. And they decide they got to do a better job of this, and so they develop a little curriculum that they're going to teach to their little kids, kindergarten to 6th grade. What was this curriculum? Well, apart from some fancy words like disrupting heteronormativity and disrupting cisnormativity, it's really kind of simple. They got a bunch of books, picture books, story books, which the kids were going to read in school. And these books communicated a certain message, an LGBT message. What kind of message? Well, among other things, kids were taught that although children are assigned to being a boy or girl at birth, often doctors and parents make a mistake about that. And that, in fact, boys and girls can decide at any time in their life that they're a different gender from the one they were assigned to. They are taught, moreover, through these classes and books, that if they decide that if a little boy decides he's a girl, that's what he is, he's a girl. If a little girl decides she's a boy, that's what she is, she's a boy. And if the parents try to stand in the way of that, well, the parents are going to be inflicting some suffering on the children. And if, however, the parents help them change their sexual identity, then that suffering will be relieved and it'll be a very positive experience. Okay, so that's what the teachers are going to be teaching their kids. That's what they start teaching their kids through these books, story books, picture books. Now a bunch of parents, they get wind of what's being taught to their kids in Montgomery County, Maryland, and they go to the school board and said, hey, hang on, what you're teaching these kids, this is conflicting with our religious beliefs, and we don't like that. And the school says, well, I'm sorry, you can't tell us what to teach. We're the school board, we decide that. You certainly can't tell us based on your religious beliefs what we're going to teach. And the parents say, no, we're not trying to tell you what to teach. We just want the right to opt out, to pull our kids out, to opt out of those particular classes. And the school board says, well, you can't do that. That's not allowed. And so the parents say, well, we're going to sue. And the school board says, well, sue us. So they sue. These parents sue. And they go to the district court, and it's a number of different parents. There's Muslim parents, Jewish parents, some Christian parents, and they say, look, what the school is teaching our little kids, that conflicts profoundly with our deeply held religious views and the religious beliefs and practices we're trying to pass on to our children. And we believe we have a constitutional right to opt our kids out of those classes. And the district court says, what are you talking about? There's no such right. You lose, case dismissed. So they appeal to the Fourth Circuit. The Fourth Circuit says, what are you talking about? You have no such right. Case dismissed. They appeal again to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court reverses and says, yes, you do have that right. These classes, according to the Supreme Court, this is what the court holds, these classes are conflicting with these parents' religious beliefs. They're imposing a substantial burden on the religious beliefs and practices that these parents are trying to pass on to their children, and therefore, parents have a right to be notified of when these classes are going to be conducted, and a right to opt out, to pull their kids out from those classes. Okay, that's the holding of the case. Might seem pretty simple, but this is a big deal. It's very important. Why is that? The Supreme Court had never, until this case, Mahmoud versus Taylor, had never held that parents had a right to pull out their kids from a public school class based on their opposition to the content of that class, whether on religious grounds or otherwise. Years ago, decades ago, in a case called Wisconsin versus Yoder, the Supreme Court had held that the Amish, the Pennsylvania Dutch Amish, that they had a right to pull their kids out of school altogether after a certain point. I think it was after 6th grade. That case, however, rested on the very unusual practices of the Amish and their status in society, and also was a case about, in effect, homeschooling. At that time, the state did not permit homeschooling, and essentially, the court was saying, yeah, they have a right to take their kids out and homeschool them at least after 6th grade, and that's what the court held. But the court had never expanded on Yoder, not one bit, and had never held that parents have a right to opt out. You know, in most states now, you can homeschool your kids. That's true in Maryland. So these parents could have homeschooled their kids, but they're saying, wait a minute, we can't do homeschooling. We don't want to do homeschooling, and we can't afford a private school. We want to keep our kids in public school, but we want to opt out, and that's what the Supreme Court said they had a right to do. First time the Supreme Court had ever so held. Okay, very big case, very big deal, but leaves some big questions unanswered. And let me tell you about them. There's one that's kind of obvious, the dissent raises it, and there's another that's a little more subtle and a little deeper, and I'm going to get to that one too. Okay, so what's the obvious one? Well, Justice Sotomayor in her dissent, this was one of these 6-3 cases, the 6 conservative justices in the majority, the 3 liberal justices in the minority, and Justice Sotomayor, writing for the dissenting justice, she says, what are you doing here? There's going to be you're opening a floodgate. What about parents who object on religious grounds to evolution? What if they say our religion tells us that man was created in 7 days, or say he certainly did not descend from dinosaurs and apes? We religiously object to that, so we want to opt our kids out of biology class. Justice Sotomayor asks that question, says, well, what, do they get to opt out of biology? So how does the majority respond to that question? Well, here's the thing. Now, I've read the opinion a couple of times, the majority opinion, but a whole bunch of Supreme Court cases came out over the last few days, so it's possible that I missed it. I didn't read carefully enough. It's possible it's there and I missed it, but I don't think so. So in short, to the question, how did the court respond to that fair question posed by Justice Sotomayor? The answer is the court did not respond. The majority, to my reading, although maybe I missed it, but to my reading, did not say a word in response to that. Now, that's not great, because there's a lot of other examples. Justice Sotomayor brings up some, but you know, what if in the next case some religious parents say, well, in our religion, women must be covered from head to foot, and only their eyes can be seen. They must be fully covered. And yet you're showing kids books and teaching them about women who are going around in the streets with normal clothes on, uncovered. And in fact, in some of these books, women are even shown in shorts or short sleeve shirts. That conflicts with our religion. We want to be opted out anytime that you show a book or a movie or anything like that to our kids. You can't show our kids that stuff. Or what if some religious kids say, in our religion, we are taught, and we must teach our children, that America is the great Satan, and yet you are teaching our kids in book after book that America is a wonderful country and a city on the hill. This is profoundly objectionable to us. We want to pull our children out of every such class, and that they have a right not to read any such book. Are they stating a constitutional claim that courts have to take seriously? What are courts supposed to do about that? Now I'm taking some extreme cases. Here's another one. We're taught in our religion that Muslims are evil because, you know, they don't believe in the Son of God, and yet you're teaching books that where Muslims are presented in a positive light, and we want to pull our kids out of that. These are all extreme cases. You can imagine, however, you know, less crazy or less extreme cases that the courts are now going to have to decide. And Justice Sotomayor has a point. There's going to be a flood of these cases. And I'll be honest, the majority, I can't believe that they didn't give some answer, didn't do a better job. Do they welcome this flood of cases? How do they expect it to be resolved? Or are they saying, no, don't worry. You're not going to have this floodgates problem. Our holding today is narrow, and here's why it's not. They didn't say any of that as I read the opinion. So bottom line here, I think the the majority should have done a better job answering that question, but now the lower courts, in the light of this case, they're definitely going to have to answer it, because lots of parents, lots of lawyers are going to be going into court saying, we object to these classes on these religious grounds. And here's one little problem with that, and it's a practical problem, not quite a legal problem, but it's serious. Litigating is very expensive. This is a point Justice Sotomayor makes. There's going to be a lot of little school districts, school boards, poorer counties. They cannot afford to hire lawyers to fight these cases. They're going to have to go along because they can't afford to hire lawyers and fight. And so these parents come in and say, we don't want our kids being taught that. The school boards are going to have to say, okay, we're going to let you opt out of that just because they can't afford to fight it. So this is a serious set of problems. Wish that the Supreme Court majority had done a better job answering it. They didn't. Now we're going to have to see how that unfolds in the lower courts. That's part of why this case is so important. Okay, second unanswered question. This is the trickier, deeper one. I'm going to go ahead and try to explain it to you. As I've described to you, this case is all about religious rights. It arises under the Free Exercise Clause of the Constitution. And the court is saying that because these classes conflicted with the parents' religious rights, that's why the parents had a constitutional right to opt their kids out. Now, what does that mean? Well, what it means is that non-religious parents do not have this right. That's right. Non-religious parents, or parents who are not raising a religious objection to these books, these classes, they can't state any claim under this case. They don't have the same constitutional rights. In short, the court is, in essence, creating and recognizing constitutional rights that religious parents have that non-religious parents do not. Now, this is continuing a trend that has been growing with this court over the last few years. Let me give you an example so you know exactly what I'm talking about. During COVID, the Supreme Court held that people with religious objections to the COVID vaccine, they had a right to an exemption from the vaccine mandates. That's right. So if you had a religious objection to the vaccine, you had a constitutional right to an exemption from the vaccine mandates that non-religious people did not have. So you have the non-religious parent or a religious parent, but who isn't stating his objection in religious terms. And he says, I don't want my 5-year-old kid taught these books either. And my reason is I don't agree with it, but more than that, I think it's very harmful to my children. I think what this school is trying to do is actually going to be very harmful to my kids. And I want to be able to opt out from that too. And under this new case, Mahmoud versus Taylor, that parent isn't stating any claim at all. Just like people who had a deep objection to the COVID vaccine for non-religious reasons, whatever it might be, they couldn't state any claim under those cases where the Supreme Court held that religious people had the exemption. So you got this developing trend where religious folks are being granted constitutional rights that non-religious people aren't. Now, here's what I want you to understand, the other side of this. People who are puzzled by what I'm saying or don't agree with it, they're going to say, well, Professor, haven't you read the First Amendment? The First Amendment has religion clauses. Can't establish religion, can't abridge the free exercise of religion. So what are you talking about? It's the Constitution that gives religious people these rights that non-religious people don't have. But hang on a second. It's actually recent developments in free exercise doctrine that is pushing and expanding these rights for religious people that are not being granted to non-religious people that the Supreme Court is now recognizing. Let me give an example so you understand what I mean. Years ago, decades ago, Vietnam War, the draft, Congress had passed a compulsory draft, but it had a conscientious objector clause. Conscientious objectors, they weren't subject to the draft. Now, the Supreme Court looked at that statute and said, to avoid constitutional problems, we are going to interpret that statute, not to just give that right to religious conscientious objectors, but to anyone with a profound moral objection serving or complying with the draft. Now, I'm not arguing in favor of conscientious objector law rules for the draft. I'm not arguing in favor of draft laws or saying they're constitutional if they have these conscientious objector. I'm not getting into the merits of any of that. Here's what I'm saying. Back then, the Supreme Court recognized that if a right of exemption from a very important, otherwise generally applicable statute was being given to religious people to avoid constitutional problems, you needed to give that to non-religious people with a comparable objection. Now, this is a subject of serious debate in constitutional law, but that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm drawing your attention to. It's not obvious under the Constitution that religious people should be given constitutional rights of exemptions to laws that everybody else is subject to without giving non-religious people same rights of exemption if they have a similar objection to the law in question. And the question becomes, how long is this sustainable? I mean, at a certain point, if you're given exemptions to all these parents to have their kids pulled out of school, if they have serious objections, they think their kids are being harmed by some teaching, but the non-religious parents say, look, my kids are being harmed too. And okay, my neighbor over here, he's framing his argument as a religious argument, and I'm not doing that, but I have the same concerns. Don't I have a right to bring up my child the way I want? Because you got to look at the majority opinion here. Often in the majority opinion in Mahmoud versus Taylor, they're saying parents have a constitutional right to have a lot of say over, a lot of control over the upbringing of their kids. Cases going back 100 years say that, and the court emphasizes that in the majority opinion in Mahmoud versus Taylor, but in the end, they only recognize the right for religious parents making religious objections. But you know that some non-religious parents are going to be saying, well, what about me? Don't I have the same constitutional rights to have a say in my kids' upbringing, to control the way my kids are being raised, and to stop schools from doing stuff that the science isn't backing up and that I deeply disagree with and I think might be harming my kids? Well, today under Mahmoud versus Taylor, the answer is no, you don't have a constitutional right. And my question is, how long is that going to be sustainable, and where's that going to go as the court develops these religious exemption cases? Okay, that's a tricky question. It's difficult. A lot of people argue about that in constitutional law, one way or the other. I've raised the question for you. Now you can think about it for yourself. That's Mahmoud versus Taylor, and that's all from me for now. I'll see you next time.